Hey guys, it's me, Freddy Pop Collector, and something I've been wanting to talk about on the channel for a long time is the Fazbear Frights stories. These odd random horror stories are probably my favorite corner of the FNAF canon. I really appreciate that not only do they bring back old characters like Plushtrap, Funtime Freddy, Foxy, and the Minarinas, but they also introduce new characters like Ralpho and Fetch. Not only are the stories more engaging than the first trilogy, but also the writing is, in my opinion, 10 times better. To celebrate the first series of the Fazbear Fright books, which it really isn't the first series, but we're not getting another book until 2021, so these were the original 5 books, so I'm considering this series 1 of Fazbear Frights, but anyway, I'm getting off track. To show my appreciation and love for this book series, I thought I would rank every single Fazbear Frights story from worst to best. As with all my top 10 and ranking videos, this is completely my opinion. None of the Fazbear Frights stories I've read so far are bad, but there's definitely ones I prefer over others. So without further ado, let's get into the ranking of every single Fazbear Fright story from worst to best, in my opinion. Coming in at number 15, and unfortunately last place, is In the Flesh. This was the second story featured in the newest book as of now, Bunny Call. In the story, we follow our main character, Matt, and I'm gonna be honest, Matt is a pretty big jerk throughout the entire story. He has little to no likable qualities, and honestly, what happens to him at the end of the story, I honestly didn't really feel sorry for him. As evil as that is, he just was a really big jerk, guys. To understand why I'm putting this story on the bottom, let me give you a quick summary of this one. Matt is a game developer making a new game called Springtrap's Revenge. This Springtrap's Revenge game is very similar to the corn maze from FNAF VR Help Wanted. In the book, the game Matt's working on is a VR game where you walk around in a maze trying to avoid Springtrap. Everything's going fine, but then the game files corrupt. Matt goes in to see what's going on, and when he finds Springtrap, he touches him and feels a slight shock. This will come into play later on. Over the next few pages, Matt is getting a lot fatter, a lot more aggressive because he's eating a lot more and he hasn't really been feeling well. This all comes to a climax when he, how do I word this without getting demonetized? He grabs a very sharp kitchen utensil, stabs himself in the stomach, and a baby Springtrap comes out of his stomach. Yeah, the reason why I ranked this story so low is it's just really unpleasant to read. I know FNAF is a horror franchise, so not everything is sunshine and rainbows, but this one just felt unnecessarily cruel. We'll see later on down the ranking that there are some cruel stories like this that are really fun because they're interesting and engaging, but this one just was kind of boring to me personally. So coming in at number 15 is In the Flesh. Let's move on to number 14. This next entry is probably going to be the most controversial, that being Coming Home, the final story in 1:35 AM. I will admit, the plot of this one is pretty interesting. We have Susie, aka Chica Victim, roaming around her house 1 year after she's been killed. Every night at 12 AM, the Chica animatronic shows up at the front door. Basically, long story short, Susie has 2 days left before the Chica animatronic takes her soul forever or something like that, I don't know. Listen, I'm sorry I'm not all into this one. This one was just kind of boring. It was just about Susie trying to communicate to her sister. Don't get me wrong, the story's not terrible. There's just not really a lot of action or tension throughout the story, and it's just okay in my opinion. I'm sorry this entry's been so short. I just really don't have a lot to say about this one, mostly because it's probably, in my opinion, the most boring and most forgettable. So coming in at number 14 is Coming Home. Let's move on to number 13. Coming in at number 13 is Lonely Freddy, the second short story in the second Fazbear Fright book, Fetch. Similarly to In the Flesh, our main protagonist is kind of a jerk, but at least at the end, Alec tries to change his ways. In this story, Alec is really jealous of his younger sister. She gets all the attention from the parents. He plans to expose her for the bad person he knows she is at her birthday party at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But surprise, surprise, it turns out she's not a bad person, and actually it was just Alec who was pushing everyone away from him. He storms off after getting into a fight with his sister, finds a Lonely Freddy, swaps bodies with it, and now Lonely Freddy has overtaken his body somehow. This one is especially sad because he tells himself he's gonna change his ways right before he body swaps with the Lonely Freddy. I did find this one slightly more interesting than Coming Home, mostly because of the family drama, but honestly, I like these two about the same. This story is a pretty solid one. The only flaw I can really see is that it's kind of slow to pick up, and also the ending I didn't really like. It's pretty sad, but it's FNAF, so what did I expect? So coming in at number 13 is Lonely Freddy. Let's move on to the top 12. Coming in at number 12 is To Be Beautiful, the second story in the very first Fazbear Fright book, Into the Pit. Similar to Lonely Freddy, the plot kind of takes a little bit to get going. Sarah finds Giraffe Baby in a junkyard and takes her home, where she says she'll grant any wish Sarah has. Sarah wishes to be beautiful, and Eleanor, aka Giraffe Baby, Eleanor takes apart Sarah night by night, making her what she thinks beautiful. Eleanor gives Sarah a necklace, telling her to never ever take it off, but of course it eventually comes off, where Sarah finds that she has been taken apart and replaced with endo parts. The last thing real Sarah sees is Eleanor putting on the necklace and transforming into Sarah before the surgery. Overall, this story was pretty okay. Again, the same problem with Lonely Freddy, it just took a little bit to get started. Overall, I'd say this is definitely the one I feel the most neutral towards. I don't really hate it, and I don't really like it either. It's one that I enjoyed, but I probably won't go back to ever again. So coming in at number 12 is To Be Beautiful. Let's move on to the top 11. Coming in at number 11 is Dance With Me, the second story in the fourth Fazbear Fright book, Step Closer. This one's weird for me because it focuses on Ballora for one, a pretty obscure character in the franchise, but also there's no action throughout this entire story. This story relies a lot on suspense and making you think what's gonna happen. In summary, Casey is a thief who stole this woman's purse outside of Circus Baby's Pizza World. Inside are some cardboard glasses. Every time she puts the glasses on, Ballora is getting closer and closer and closer. Casey moves around twice in the story to try to escape Ballora, but she's following her, and Casey comes to the conclusion that the only way she's gonna get away from Ballora is if she returns the glasses. So that's what she does, and that's the end. Nobody dies or anything, it's just over. Similar to Be Beautiful, Lonely Freddy, and Coming Home, this one was just kind of okay. I don't really have a lot to say about it. The last 4 entries, I pretty much think of them all the same, but the reason why I put this one on top is because I feel like the characters, Casey and Ballora, are much more fleshed out, and the stakes feel a lot higher because you don't know what's gonna happen when Ballora finally gets close enough. I definitely prefer the action stories, but this one being more of a character study was a really nice change of pace. So coming in at number 11 is Dance With Me. Let's move on to the top 10. Okay, we have a pretty big drop from number 11 to number 10. These next 10 stories are ones that I really enjoyed, and ones that I would definitely recommend you read. Kicking off the top 10, we have Fetch. This one is probably the most straightforward and simple, but in a good way. In the story, we follow Greg, who finds Fetch at an old abandoned FNAF pizzeria. He hooks up his cell phone to it, and then Fetch starts sending him text messages, and things just go downhill from there. I won't spoil the whole thing, but it's pretty gruesome. Previous stories I've mentioned, like Coming Home and To Be Beautiful, I couldn't do in one sitting, but stories from number 10 onward, I was so invested that I had to finish them in one go. So kicking off the top 10 is Fetch. Let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9 is the first story of book number 4, Step Closer. I have a really weird love-hate relationship with this story because the story is so good, the locations are interesting, and the characters are compelling, but the ending is probably my favorite and least favorite ending of all of these books. What happens to our main character is so brutal. He gets ran over by a freaking truck. We've seen some pretty cruel stuff happen in this franchise. We've seen childs getting murdered, people getting scooped, but what we haven't seen is their loved ones' reactions to these events, and this just really hit hard. There's very few stories that will leave me with a lasting emotion after I read them, and this one was definitely one of them. If you're wondering why he got hit by a truck, well, it's a long story. Foxy puts somewhat of a curse on our main character, and a bunch of stuff just happens. He keeps almost losing his eye and his arm in multiple events. I'm sorry I can't go into detail with all of these stories. This video would be like half an hour long, so I'm gonna leave a link to Dawko's review of each Fazbear Fright books where he goes in great detail, or you can just read them yourself. But coming in at number 9 is Step Closer. Let's move on to number 8. Coming in at number 8 is 1:35 a.m., the first story in 1:35 a.m. This one, very similar to Dance With Me, has a very adventurous tone where they go to multiple locations throughout the story, and I really enjoy stories like this. Delilah is also very fleshed out as a character. We get to see her backstory, where she works, what her goals are, and it's really sad what happens to her at the end because I was actually really rooting for her. This story is very similar to Fetch in the way the events are constructed and the way they play out in the end. In both stories, it starts out simple enough. They find the animatronic in a deactivated state, but then when they take them home, turn them on, things go pretty downhill immediately, in Delilah's case, leading to her death. And it's interesting because Ella can't kill someone, she's just a little doll. She actually drives Delilah to the point of insanity where Delilah pretty much kills herself. Back when I was discussing In the Flesh, I said that there is a way to make gruesome stories done right, and this is definitely a great example of that. It's sad and very tragic, but it left me in a state of, wow, that actually happened, rather than, oh my god, I feel so sorry for him, not really lol. So coming in at number 8 is 1:35 a.m. Let's move on to number 7. Okay, we're in the point of the video now where it pains me to put this entry as low as it is. This story was so incredible, and Dawko actually just released a song of this today. That story being... Count the waves, one by one. By the way, I just wanted to say after editing this video, I've been listening to this song nonstop for like the past 48 hours, please help. This story is probably the best representation of the Fazbear Frights stories in my opinion. We get a real feel of the characters and the world around them. We know why Millie's living with her grandpa. We know why her grandpa collects his trash. We know why Funtime Freddy is doing what he's doing. It's just honestly incredible how well this story blends together, and there's very few flaws with it. I won't spend too much time on it because we pretty much all know this story by now, or at least I hope so. Please read it if you haven't, or at least watch Dawko's summary. This book is just awesome. So it's Christmas time. Millie's feeling a bit sad because a boy she thought liked her didn't, and she goes inside Funtime Freddy to get away from everybody, but Funtime Freddy's evil, supposedly kills her at the end, and that's pretty much the basic rundown. The only flaw I have with this story, the only one, is the cliffhanger at the end. I'm not a big fan of cliffhangers, and if they ever make a part 2 to this story, which I really hope they do, but they probably won't, but anyways, I just really didn't like the cliffhanger. So coming in at number 7 is Count the Ways. Let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6, and barely missing the top 5, is The Man in Room 1280, the final story in Bunny Call. This story, much like Count the Ways, has very few flaws for me personally. Our main protagonist is a priest who goes to see a man who's dying in parentheses there. He was burned in a fire over 2 years ago. His organs are exposed, his skin's ripped off, it's very gruesome. He's obviously supposed to be William Afton. He's in a constant state of torment because there's a spirit keeping him alive in an alligator mask. We never get the true identity of this black-haired curly kid, but he actually does appear in a story I'll talk about later down the line. I gave you guys a quick summary, but there's a lot of small details that I really couldn't talk about fully. Like I already said, I highly recommend you read these stories, this one definitely being one of my favorites. So coming in at number 6 is The Man in Room 1280. Let's move on to the top 5. Who knew that a story based on the main arena of all characters could be one of the best? Room for One More is very simple. Much like Fetch and 1:35 a.m., Stanley goes to his workplace at sister location, completes his shift, goes home, he feels a little bit of pain, goes back, gets more pain, goes back, gets more pain, goes back, gets more pain, then the story ends. But why is he in so much pain, you ask? Well, it's because each night, Minarinas crawl inside his throat and go into his arms, legs, bodies, and it's really disturbing. It's very mysterious, and the lore is pretty interesting. Of course, I can't go into all of it, but this one's definitely worth the read. Stanley also sleeps on the job where he has dreams that Funtime Freddy's chasing him in the dark, Funtime Foxy's a cab driver, and Ballora is a dentist nurse lady. This story was all around just really fun. Even though our main character meets a gruesome demise, he was really fun, and this story overall was just a blast to read, even though he definitely should have gone to the doctor by the second day, but we'll just ignore that. So short and sweet, coming in at number 5 is Room for One More. Let's move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is the very first Fazbear Frights story ever created, that being Into the Pit. Like Count the Ways, I think everyone should be familiar with this story. Being the first story, it keeps things relatively simple. Spring Bonnie murders 5 children. Oswald finds this by going into Jeff's Pizza and going into the time-traveling ball pit, going back to 1985 to see the events unfold. It's really out there and wacky, but I really enjoy that. This story was definitely the perfect one to kick off the Fazbear Frights series. This story has great lore implications, is very engaging, and overall is one of the best ones to date. So coming in at number 4 is Into the Pit. Let's move on to number 3. Kicking off the top 3, we have the final story from 1:35 a.m., that being The New Kid. This story sticks out to me for one reason and one reason alone. Kelsey gets spring-locked. All jokes aside, this story was incredible. The writing was definitely top-notch, some of the best writing we've seen. I can't really explain it to you, but trust me, the writing in this one is definitely top tier. Kelsey is the new kid who just came into town, quickly becoming friends with both Meek and Devin. Devin, though, is a little bit jealous of Kelsey because of some girl jealousy drama, I don't know. Anyways, Devin wants to play a prank on Kelsey to get back at him. His plan is to put Kelsey in the spring-lock suit, leave him overnight to make him get scared, and then come back for him the next day, but obviously, this severely backfires. Kelsey tries to dance in the suit, which obviously sets off the spring locks, killing Kelsey. Meek and Devin run out of the restaurant, but Devin comes back a few days later to see if he's still there, and he's not for some reason. Devin puts his whole arm inside the suit to see if he's still there, and his arm gets spring locked in the suit. He bleeds out right before seeing a curly-haired, black-haired kid, the same kid we see in The Man in Room 1280, and that's pretty much the entire story. It's really interesting, one of the best in my opinion. I do really mean when I say I wouldn't change anything about this story. The only reason why it's not at number 2 or number 1 is because I personally enjoyed reading those two more, so let's just move on to number 2. Coming in at number 3 is The New Kid. Let's move on to the top 2. Taking home the silver medal for my favorite Fazbear Frights story, in my opinion, is Bunny Call. This one, similar to Coming Home, I feel like is going to be a little bit controversial in the comment section because this one is not as epic or influential as, say, The New Kid, but I can't help it. This story was very relatable and one that I really enjoyed all the way through, start to finish. Bob signs his family up for the Bunny Call, basically waking everybody up at 5 a.m. as a prank, but he quickly regrets this because he realizes that doing that to his family is pretty rude. He wakes up multiple times throughout the night and stays up waiting for Bunny Call, aka Ralpho, which is the official name, to show up to tell him to go away and that he wants to cancel the Bunny Call. But Ralpho will not take no for an answer. He tries to come through multiple windows, multiple trap doors, and when it hits 6 a.m. he finally decides to give it up. At one point in the story, Ralpho starts to bleed, which I don't know if he actually bleeds, if he's an actual animatronic or if it's just a person inside. Tell me what you guys think about this in the comments. But overall, in my opinion, this is definitely one of the best Fazbear Frights stories and one that I probably enjoyed the most. So coming in at number 2 is Bunny Call. Let's move on to number 1. And finally, coming in at number 1 for what I think is hands down the best Fazbear Frights story of all time is Out of Stock. Oscar, along with his 2 friends, want the brand new plush trap chaser. It's sold out all across the country. Oscar does eventually get one by stealing it, but not really. He left money for it, but he wasn't supposed to take it. Anyway, this plush trap chaser has really shocking similarities to the spring trap from In the Flesh. As you would expect, the plush trap turns rogue and chases them, bites through a garage door, and ends up getting ran over by a train. This story was a blast to read. The writing was off the charts. The characters were fleshed out, their goals, motivations, everything was just incredible. The action, oh my god. I could go into detail about this story for hours, but I will say this story was definitely the best, and if you ever plan on reading any of the stories, start with this one. So with that being said, that's gonna wrap out my ranking of all the Fazbear Frights stories up to the release of Bunny Call. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you're new. Tell me what you guys think about these stories in the comments. What's your ranking, what you agree with on me, and what you don't, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.